Good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School. First of all, thank you for your patience for anybody who had trouble getting into the webinar last week. Like many of you, we are learning fast about the nuances of Zoom, but pleased that you could all join us. That being said, we are thrilled with your interest in the Business Over Breakfast webinars. And we're going to be continuing them in May with a series of webinars focused on strategic problem solving and communicating. But during April, we are continuing the Economy and Me webinars with Tom Smith. Tom is an expert in the areas of labor economics, pricing, sports economics, financing, the economics of the entertainment industry and healthcare, and the economics during crises such as the one that we are experiencing at the moment. We've been quite overwhelmed by the interest in the Economy and Me series and the number of questions that Tom's been getting. And we're working on getting those answered and put up on our LinkedIn site. So please continue to post the questions on the Q&A section in the on the Zoom. And for those of you who want to focus more, deepen and broaden your skills in terms of finance and particularly personal finance, Tom is going to be leading a personal finance workshop over the next 5 weeks. So 2 hours each week. For 5 weeks starting on Friday. And we have tried to price this as a very accessible price point so that everybody who is interested can join. So please consider that. Tom's going to kick off this webinar with some observations from the last week about what's been happening in the economy and how it impacts you, your families, your businesses, the industries that you are working in, and then follow that up with the continuing Q&A. So again, please put that in the Q&A section, and we will do our best to answer those and put those up on the Emory Executive Education LinkedIn site. Please enjoy the morning with Tom, and I look forward to continuing the conversation next Thursday. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dean. Nicola, appreciate it. Let me, can you all hear me here? Oops, okay, hold on one second here. I'm gonna share a release that just came out. I hope you can see this. This is from the Department of Labor, new uninsurance employment claims. I've been focusing on this because these are the numbers that are quite startling and really making people very anxious. And for good reason. And again, not trying to make people think about this as being worse than it is, but we really have to understand exactly what the numbers are showing us. And so what we had here for last Friday is another 5.245 million people claiming initial unemployment. So we've got 3.3 followed by 6.8, followed by 6.6, followed by 5.2 and change. So roughly in the last 4 weeks, we've had somewhere in the neighborhood of 23 million people filing initial unemployment claims. And a lot of the questions that I'm getting from people is, how does this compare to the Great Depression? Where does this thing go from just a recession to a depression? I'm calling this COVID depression. This is it. This is as bad as we've ever seen, and I don't think that this number next week, so the people who are filing for unemployment claims, initial unemployment claims this week, that'll be reported next Thursday, it's not going to go to zero, right? If it goes down to 2 million or 1 million, we would be lucky. But now we're still talking about, something in the neighborhood of 25 million people being unemployed. So the metropolitan area of Atlanta is 5 million. So think about 4.5 times the size of Atlanta metro area being unemployed across the country. Initial unemployment. There's still people who were unemployed before that. Right? And so, but this is the initial unemployment. It's a very scary number to think about. And I know that doesn't make anybody, doesn't give anybody any kind of solace or any comfort about that. I just want people to know that this is as bad as it is, and it's nothing that we've ever seen before. Okay, is there any good news, or is there anything that we can say? Okay, but at least this is happening. The answer is yes. So the CARES Act, which was the fiscal policy that was signed into law like 2 weeks ago, so the checks to individuals that went out this week, people have started receiving those funds. So they're rolling out in different states at different times. So I know that my older daughter, her family received their check. So they got check for the family plus 500 for each kid. So that arrived in their bank account. I know some people are going to get checks mailed to them. Those have been delayed a little bit by Department of Treasury. But if you're getting automatic service to your bank, then you might have already received a check. I know that after initial stumbles, which was through the SBA loan process, they're actually now SBA loans are being processed and some firms are receiving their money. And so I got confirmation from a couple clients that yes, they had filed, the loan was approved and they actually were funded. That is, the money is in the bank. And so that's also good. Unfortunately, not every company is receiving this money at the same time, and so it's still rolling out. Even though a lot of people applied, last Friday, there was 2 Fridays ago, there were still a lot of bottlenecks with respect to the banks, the SBA, and the banks coordinating with each other, making sure that those loans were available. And so those loans are now being distributed. The applications are being approved. People are getting their money. The emergency loans, so there's up to $10,000 of emergency funds, that's been modified. So I got emails and I got confirmation that some of my clients received emails as well. So that loan process, it was up to $10,000. Now you're receiving emails that are saying, okay, we're only going to give you $1,000 per paid employee, up to $10,000. So if you're a small business and you had 3 employees, they're probably only going to approve $3,000 of that grant. That's the emergency grant. For other companies, you might get the full 10 if you had 10, 15, 20 employees. If you single proprietor LLC, you might get $1,000, but you're very, very low on the list. So unemployment is super high. We've got some money that's coming in. It's kind of in fits and starts, if you will, but it has been in bank accounts, and then the individual checks are coming in as well. My concern about all of this is, how do businesses get up and running? For the checks, individual checks, what are you going to spend your money on? Most businesses are, other than essential businesses, are closed. So you can order something on Amazon, you can order something online and have it delivered to your door. You can get food delivered, but there's not a whole lot of ways to spend money. What I'm encouraging a lot of people to do, and so we've started doing this ourselves in our family, is to continue the payments as much as we can to all of the ancillary activities, all of the small businesses that we entertain or that we use on a regular basis, to make sure that when this is over, there are businesses to go back to. So the dance studio, still making payments to the dance studio, even though this is all online. The music lessons, still making payments to the music lessons, even though those are online and the quality is probably not what it should be. Still making payments to the gym. It's like, okay, we can't go to the gym, send me a workout or send me something online. It's not the same experience, but I don't want these businesses to go out of business in the interim, because now what would we go back to, right? So, I talked to people at all of these organizations, told them that, I'm willing to do this, but you've got a little bit of a collective action problem. And that's why I'm encouraging you to think about continuing to try to spend money at community organizations, that is, businesses in your space. And so the collective action problem here is that this only works if me and all the other parents decide to keep paying for the dance lessons. Because if it's just me, or if it's just a couple of us and the rest of them say, forget about it, I'm not getting my money's worth, then the dance studio still closes. And then I'm out some money and the kids still aren't dancing, and then they won't be dancing in the future because, you know, when the veil is lifted and we can go back to work or we can go back out in the community and start interacting again, that business is not going to open up unless they have the capital to do so, unless they have the money in the reserves. And right now they're burning through the reserves unless they have a constant cash flow. And so I've been looking for companies that are offering, you know, essentially making present value calculations. Like, how about something now for something more later on? And so I found a shirt company that's making shirts and saying, well, we're not making shirts right now, but if you buy a shirt now, then we're going to give you 2 shirts in the future. So I don't know, if we get back to school, you guys are going to see me in lots of plaids and checks and stripes because I just bought a whole bunch of shirts, and I'll get a 2 for 1. So if you're lucky enough to be walking down the hall at the right time, I might throw a shirt at you, not off my back literally, but you know, I'm getting 2 for 1. Okay, there's probably lots of questions, and I'm curious about what people are interested in and how this is impacting them. So I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Tom. The first question that was received this morning asks, do you think unemployment claims are so high because it's attractive given the extra $600 per week?
So let's talk about this. So the unemployment insurance usually is paying you, it's a percentage of what you ordinarily would make up to a maximum of whatever it is, $350 per week. And then part of one of the 3 phases of the fiscal stimulus included an additional $600 sort of stipend on top of that. So you get your normal uninsurance plus an additional $600. Do I think that people who could be working are saying, screw it, I'm going to quit my job and go file for unemployment? I don't think that people are choosing this over other options. Of course, you know, that's on the margin. There's going to be some bad actors. There's always some bad actors in the economy, and there's always people who sort of take advantage of programs when they perceive some kind of an enhanced benefit. So there's no doubt that there's people who say, well, I could work, but I'm not going to. Typically, and this is just changes in how the unemployment insurance and unemployment reporting. Typically, when you've been unemployed, you have to file a report weekly that identifies how it is that you're seeking employment. So if you can only be unemployed if you are not working but actively seeking employment, and then you could receive your unemployment insurance. So they're changing those rules because there's nothing open. So people can't exactly actively seek. Do I think that these numbers could be inflated because some bad actors? No doubt that there are some bad actors. Do I think that it's 3 million people? No way. Do I think that it's all these people are just bad actors? That's an impossibility. So I know that higher uninsurance benefits will change on the margin some people's behavior, but I don't think it accounts for even a majority. Even if it was 10%, I would be skeptical of that amount. 1%, maybe 2%, it's possible. Anything above that, I think is probably unrealistic, but I do think that there are some bad actors, yes.
Good morning, Tom. Are furloughed employees accounted for in these numbers? And at some point, do you think companies will move employees from furlough status to terminate them as shutdowns continue?
Yes. So in the past, like when we've had the government, which has shut down. So if we have an impasse between, let's say, the government and Congress, and you can't come up with a budget, and the government has to shut down, and a whole bunch of government employees have been furloughed, those employees do not show up on the unemployment rolls. Okay, so you've been furloughed for a week or two, and You get, it's like rolling furlough days. You're not unemployed. And so I had friends who were working for the city of Chicago once upon a time. And when Illinois was going through some budget crises, city workers would have like 8 furlough days during the year. So it's just like, okay, next Friday is a furlough day. Nobody's coming to work, but no one's getting paid. But then Monday you'd pick back up. And on that Friday, you wouldn't be counted as unemployed. So it's actually a very, very keen observation that typically when you've had these rolling furloughs, those people don't show up on unemployment. Right now, they do. So the furlough, the difference between unemployment and a furlough is just the relationship between the employer and the employee. It's a little simplistic, but I think it makes the point. So if you are becoming unemployed, you have severed your relationship with that employee. So you say, fine, I don't have any work for you. We're shutting our doors and now you're fired, okay? And that person becomes unemployed. If we say, okay, we can't stay in business, we're gonna have to shut down, we're gonna furlough everybody, but when we get up and running, you guys are all still employees, we just don't have any work for you right now. So we're shutting down, boom, 3 months, 4 months, whatever it happens to be. And then when we come back online, furloughed employees are still on the books technically. Like, you do not have to rehire them with all of the paperwork and I-9s and all of that stuff. They're still on the books. So you can start paying them again right away. There's not a whole lot of benefit for companies to officially fire their workers if they think they're going to come back on board and they want to minimize those transaction costs. They're very, very high transaction costs for finding workers and getting them on board. And so companies can actually save a lot of future expenses by furloughing and keeping these employees on the books, if you will. But companies who think that they're never going to come back, they're probably going to fire people. And so I would anticipate in the next couple weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, if we can get an idea about where we're going to hit the apex of this, of new cases, of deaths, when it is that the economy might open, some glimmer of hope, then companies can start planning. And if it looks like, okay, it's not going to be until September 1st, or it's not going to be until November 1st or something, then I would suspect a lot of companies would go from furloughing to actually firing their workers. It's a great question.
Does the U.S. government have the fiscal ability to do Great Depression style government spending to restart the economy?
Yeah, I've actually been talking about that. I talked to Dean Nicola this morning about that. And so I think that the government has to seriously consider some WPA, Works Progress Administration, huge spending plan for the future. So roads and bridges and bringing, internet to the Appalachians or something like this. Just, I mean, out of the box, let's get everybody up and working. Let's spend a huge amount of money. I mean, the government's been kind of kicking around the idea of, capital projects, right? Let's invest in our infrastructure, right? Let's invest in some airports. Let's invest in some roads. Let's invest in some other kind of waterways. Let's invest hospitals, schools, high-speed internet, fibers, all these things, making people super connected. Yeah, this is probably the time to do that. I think that people are freaked out because we could be having a debt structure that is 150% of our GDP or more, right? And people say, okay, is it viable? Can we actually have debt at 100% or 150 or 160% or 200% of our GDP? Sure, you can. Costs of that in the future, we're going to have to be more fiscally conservative in the future, but you can do that. And the government has those resources as long as people are still buying government securities. So yeah, and I think that that's probably what we're going to have to do going forward, is either rely on a huge amount of government loans that are 100% forgivable to get businesses back and running, or the government's going to have to employ everybody. When I say everybody, I mean a large majority. We've got 23 million people who are initially unemployed, and probably another 3 million next week, and probably another 1.5 million to 2 million the week after that. So, we're going to have 30 million people unemployed, over 6 weeks, over 8 weeks. yeah, the government's going to have to employ these people.
Do you expect an increase in job creation as steep as these job losses of the last week?
I don't. I know a lot of people have been talking about a V-shaped economy, and hold on, let's see if I can, let me stop sharing this. I shared some of this last week. These are great questions. So I mean, people have been saying, like, look, is it possible that we're going to have this V-shape? When I talk about the V-shape, you could either talk about sort of like unemployment. So if it was unemployment claims, right, these unemployment claims have gone way up. And are we likely to, after a short period of time, see them come way back down again? And here, that's our V. It's an inverted V, right? Or if you're thinking about, let's say, GDP or loss of businesses or something like this, that you say, okay, are we going to have this steep decline in GDP like this, and then this steep increase? And here's our V. Okay. And so people are saying, what's the shape of the recovery? Is it a V? Is it a U? Is it a wheelbarrow? I think it's much more like a hockey stick wheelbarrow kind of a situation. So maybe something like this, right? I guess it looks like the bottom of a wheelbarrow, the top of I mean, it's kind of a gradual return. And I think a lot of this has to do with how freaked out people are about a reoccurrence of this. So if we can get a handle on it, stop outbreaks, put processes in place that when a state identifies new cases, that those people are quarantined, that we still maintain social distancing, I think you could get back to work fairly quickly. But a lot of this, the fact that there's such a slow start here, has to do with business owners being able to tap into capital that would allow them to start their businesses back up again. That's a real concern. And so, you know, a lot of small business owners that I'm talking to are saying, I'm burning through my reserves. I mean, I have zero cash flow. I'm not selling anything right now. Nobody's buying my services. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with my business. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the economy at large. It's just everything's been shut down due to COVID. So getting back started would be great, but I've just burned through all of my cash. So I unopen my doors, and then I'm going to have to make restitution with my landlord that I haven't paid for X number of months. So I got to make sure I can get back into my building, or I'm going to be working from home, in which case I don't need this service and that service and this service. I mean, there's a lot of issues with getting restarted. It's not as easy as just walking in and unlocking a door and opening it up, and then you have, you know, throngs of people coming in and wanting to buy your product. People are going to be scared. People are going to be hesitant about entering back into the economy, and business owners don't have the capital. They're going to burn through it in the next 6 weeks, 7 weeks. So they have to have loans. The more robust loan packages and the more the government gets involved here, the steeper we can make this recovery. But without any real sense about how this is going to work, you cannot promise something that looks like that. That's just unrealistic. It's going to be much, much, much more gradual. A long L, a hockey stick, a wheelbarrow, whatever shape you want to think of, but it's not a V.
Tom, the comment in question states, hospitals are furloughing employees at an alarming rate. The hospitals are losing revenue because elective and or non-invasive surgeries have been canceled, which is their primary revenue source. Can you comment on guidelines and or restrictions of how healthcare organizations can apply the money received from the U.S. government as part of the package?
Well, so the payroll protection package is for any company has less than 500 employees. So, I mean, depending on the size of the hospital, you know, they may not actually receive their funds. If they receive funds through the payroll protection plan, then you're getting something in the neighborhood of about 2.5 times what your monthly payroll were. So you have to turn in your 940s, I think is what the form is, and then you'll get funded, and then there's 25% relief of those funds if you use those to either retain workers or hire workers. So you retain your employees, and then they will sort of gift back 25% of the funds that you receive. You can also use it for utilities and mortgage or rents or things of this nature. And so if a hospital were to receive these funds, then it would behoove them to use those funds to retain their workers, because then they would get a relief on 25% of the total grant that they received. So I'm strongly encouraging businesses that have applied and have received these funds to actually use those funds in the way that they were intended. But it's very, very broad. So they say you can use it to retain employees, but you can also use it for utilities and other sort of expenses that you incur as a business owner. You get a relief on up to 25% of that grant if you use it on workers. And then you have to show that you have maintained your payroll rolls, okay? So I understand that hospitals are firing people who are working in units that they're not being used. If there's a way for a hospital to actually transfer people from one unit to another unit, I would encourage that they do that. But I get it. Like the hospital has to use the resources that it has at its disposal, and it has to allocate people in ways that are most productive. And it knows that not everybody is fully transferable. So if you are working in one department, it doesn't mean you can go work in the ER automatically. It just, there's a different skill set, and there's probably a different set of needs that are there. And so, you know, I if the hospital is receiving those PPP payments, then I encourage them to use as much as they can to get that 25% relief to keep their employees.
Tom, can we talk about the sports industry for a minute?
I would love to. I'm a sports economist.
Right.
That sounds great.
Something that you're very familiar with. Do you expect an uptick in sales, partial sales of teams? And can you talk about the uncertainties and revenues and what you foresee for the future?
Yeah, the teams are, I mean, football is the only game in town, right? Really, because they're still behaving as if they're going to have a season that starts in September, right? October. And so they're going through drafts, they're going through trades, they're going through free agency. They're doing all the things that they would do normally. It's all of the sports that would be going on right now that are completely halted. So baseball, right? Basketball, you know, no basketball, right? Playoffs would be going on right now. You know, no hockey. So these teams, I'm not anticipating that the owners of the teams are going to just sell their teams, if that was the question. So I don't anticipate that a bunch of owners are going to sell the teams. All the owners are in the same situation. I mean, unless you're a deca-billionaire and you've got money to burn, they're all seeing, you know, expenses are continuing and no revenue is being brought in. So my understanding, talking to somebody that's affiliated with Major League Baseball yesterday, it turns out that the baseball players are going to get their year of service, and they're going to get some payments. I mean, a lot of baseball players have pay structures that are related to performance, right? You know, how many home runs did you hit? Did you make the All-Star team? You know, roster days, what have you. So clearly, those parts of their salary aren't able to be paid out, but there still are parts of the collective bargaining agreement that you can go back to and say, okay, this is the number of years of service. This is what your minimum salary should be at this level. Then they're getting their years of service and they're getting paid. You know, and I think that that's also true for some of the other leagues, but I haven't talked to anybody from from the NBA or the National Hockey League, but I have talked to people from the Major League Baseball, and it appears that they are getting years of service and they are going to get some paychecks. But I don't anticipate that all of a sudden Ricketts is going to sell the Cubs. I mean, if he does, I'm going to have to raise $1 billion first, but I'll be first in line to buy those guys. Other questions?
Tom, next question. There's been rumors swirling around in the news about the SBA being out of money. What does that mean? And for those that have not gotten the benefit yet, how will they be impacted?
So, I mean, there's a fixed amount of money. I have not heard that they're out of money. So I had an alert. There's an emergency loan portion, a disaster relief emergency loan that was up to $10,000. And so, you know, my wife's company applied for that. I encouraged some other small businesses to apply for that. And an email came out this week that said, essentially, yes, in order to have as many companies, help as many companies as possible. We're changing the terms. Instead of a $10,000, you're getting $1,000 per employee that you had, up to $10,000. So sole proprietors and what have you are only going to get $1,000. That would seem to suggest that they know what the end of that bucket looks like. How many different analogies can I use? That money is running out, or they can see that that money will run out very shortly. The SBA, these are not infinite number of funds, right? So it wasn't all $3 trillion went for the SBA. We're talking about, a couple $100 million. I mean, even if it's like $600 or $700 million, there's not an unlimited amount of money. I mean, that amount of money will run out. I do not know when it's going to run out. I have heard rumors, but I do know that people are being funded. And I do know that because there was such a kerfuffle, a lot of people weren't able to get their loans in until the middle of last week, right? It's the previous Friday is when it opened up, on the 3rd. And, it took some people until the middle of last week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, to actually get those loans in through some of these larger banks, because the banks were saying, we're done, we can't do anything. It wouldn't be surprising to me if they are out of money. I haven't heard that they actually are out of money. I'm not sure that if they were, they would announce it, because, this is we're 13 days into the actual loan process. If they're out of money, we're in trouble. But I have heard that there is ideas of a 4th round of stimulus or additional rounds of stimulus beyond that. So maybe we have to rely on those stimulus packages to get the job done. It's a possibility.
Tom, I have a question from a former student of yours. Speaking of the film and entertainment industry, what are some of the major changes you expect to see in the industry as a result of COVID-19? Do you think companies like Disney will have to adapt now that significant revenue streams such as their amusement parks are closed?
Yes, I think that Disney is going to have to adapt. I think that what we walk back into from our economy, or to our economy, is going to be vastly different than what it looks like right now. So you mentioned Disney. So are the theme parks going away? Is it possible that people aren't going to go back to theme parks? It's very possible that in the next year, you could go to Disney and there just won't be that many people around, because they're not interested in being in a line next to somebody half a foot away for an hour to get on the Jungle Cruise or something, right? And so you say, I don't want to be in a place confined with that many people because I have health concerns. And so the idea of going to a Disney park might be really unappealing for people for a year or longer. I could fully anticipate that. So Disney might have to rethink about, what it is that it's providing. Other companies, like you mentioned, film, I wouldn't be surprised if your AMCs or your Regals, some of them just never open back up. I mean, I've read a lot of companies are downgrading. Moody's is downgrading the stock for Regal or AMC. There's just not very good investments. Are people getting used to entertainment being streamed into their house for a fraction of the price without the expense of M&Ms? Yeah, they absolutely are. So I would fully anticipate that a lot of movie theaters just never come back. The way that we value entertainment is completely changed. But I see that for all types of companies. So, your dry cleaner, maybe you just don't want to have dry clean shirts, or maybe, and I mentioned this last week, but I'll mention it again. I have no doubt that for a fraction of the people who are watching this right now that were working at an office, when the economy opens back up, that your company will call you and say, we're not going to open up the office. Like, the office is closed. Just work from home. You're getting the job done. We'll have, remote video conferencing, and we'll send you to some clients, but we're just not going to take on the expense of having an office. We don't need it. Everybody's getting it done. We don't want the expense. We don't want the hassle. Just walk away from that whole concept, going to the office. Right? I could imagine that would be the reality for 10%, 15% of the people who are watching this right now. Just their office never opens back up, or it opens up 8 years from now or 10 years from now, or they enter into an industry that said, yeah, we used to have lots of offices, but no more. So, we could go down a list of 25 different types of industries that I think are going to change, but I fully anticipate that what we saw in our economy before is not going to look like what we are going to see in the economy when it opens back up, maybe midsummer or beginning of fall. And
Wow,
glad to see my students are still are watching. I hope you're doing well.
they are definitely here. Tom, given the shift in the economy and understanding long-term trends, where are the most valuable opportunities to invest for the long term to have the most growth?
I like this question. And I always say, buy what you buy, and think about the companies that are providing goods and services that you can't live without right now. So it's Clorox and Johnson and Johnson and GlaxoSmithKline or whatever else. I mean, you still need your breather. You still need your breather, right? You still need Tylenol or Advil or what have you. You're still going to need those in the future. Okay. I was talking to someone, they said, oh, Ford is trading at like $5. I think this company's going away. I don't think the company's going away. I mean, it's trading like it's not going to exist in the future. But I mean, if it's true, then my Mustang is going to be a collector's item, right? The very last, Mustang year created. But I don't think that that's the truth. I think that Ford's going to be in business and they're going to make more Mustangs. So I would say, look for a company that you think has a potential to still exist in the near future, that is not likely to go away. Is Disney going to change their business model? Absolutely. Is Disney going away? Nope. Disney is not going away, right? People still like Disney movies. They still like entertainment. Disney's got a streaming service. Their parks might not be a big part of their revenue stream going forward, but Disney's still going to make movies. Disney still has entertainment available. So I don't think they're going away. So look for companies like that. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the major airline companies gets rolled into one of the others. I mean, they all can't exist in the current format. So, does American become part of United? Does United become part of Delta? Those are real possibilities. But I would look for the companies that are going to be around, right? Coca-Cola's not going anywhere. I don't think Ford's going anywhere. Disney's not going anywhere. And if those things are trading way below, if they're trading at a price that suggests that they're going away next week, then buy them up. Again, I don't work for any of those companies, and I'm not affiliated with any of those companies. It's just those are the companies that came to mind.
Tom, if your prediction of 10 to 15% of offices never reopening or maybe not opening for 8 to 10 years, do you expect a crash of commercial real estate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the real estate market is in big trouble. So I think that, so commercial backed securities are in big trouble. So, we mentioned this the other week, is that Cheesecake Factory, they made an announcement. We're not paying our rent. Now, clearly, Cheesecake Factory, if you work at the Cheesecake Factory, you're probably going to have to go back to the office, because Cheesecake Factory only works if you go to the physical restaurant, right? Their menu is 7 years long, for crying out loud. But other places, I could just imagine them saying, forget about it. Just not worth the hassle. Everybody's getting their job done. We can meet someplace off, someplace in downtown or midtown or whatever else for a big meeting. And then there's just one expense one time, and then everybody goes about their business. So I fully anticipate that commercial real estate is going to crash, but it's in the process of crashing right now because people are not paying their rents. They don't have the money to pay their rents. And as a result, those are not they're not good assets, right? Lots of REITs that ordinarily would be classified as, highly risky assets. The Fed and regulators are trying to sort of rewrite the rules around owning things like REITs so that banks don't have to, have different kind of capital constraints. So yeah, I would not recommend getting into any kind of like commercial or corporate backed mortgage securities. I would stay away from those things. That market's going to crash. And the residential market is not much better, and people don't have disposable income, but banks aren't making mortgage loans, and banks aren't refinancing. So I mean, I talked to a major bank yesterday and asked them about, you know, how they're doing in terms of the refinancing, and they said all of our refinancing is on hold for the next 90 days. So we're not even taking applications for anything, because a lot of people are thinking about refinancing, taking money out, and they say they're all risky. We just saw that JP Morgan released an announcement 2 days ago that said that they're not going to do any mortgage underwriting for anybody with credit scores less than about 720. And they have put all of this money in these capital reserves because they are fully aware that all of their holdings, all their balance sheet holdings of any kind of mortgage-backed security are going to start failing or have already failed, and the risk of those things is going to go way up. And so these Basel's, so there's different regulations, and Basel is one of them, that identifies how much capital a bank has to hold against different assets, different tiers of assets that have different riskiness. And mortgage-backed securities are now becoming really risky. So banks have to recapitalize in order to meet the regulation requirements against the riskiness of those assets. So yeah, those markets are in bad shape. I feel really bad for people who own commercial property and we're expecting their renters to pay. Your renters are not going to pay. I mean, we know this is going to happen. It's criminal, but that's the truth of it, and those markets are going to crash. They're already crashing.
Wow, Tom, you mentioned a moment ago the airline industry. What's your view on the government providing the $25 billion to airlines to pay their workers, and how is that going to impact unemployment claims?
Well, I mean, it'll keep the unemployment claims from going up by another, 5 or 8 million workers or something like this, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who work for the airline industry. I think that some of the commentary that I'm reading is it possible that every business is too big to fail? Like, is it really the government's responsibility to save everybody? They're going to save the airlines and save the auto industry and save the oil industry and save the healthcare industry and save this industry and that industry. Like, shouldn't just the market take care of it? Well, this isn't exactly a market problem, right? There's nothing fundamentally wrong with the airline business or the airline industry that's causing these companies to fail. It's that nobody is flying because there's nothing to fly to. You don't want to be on a flight. You don't want to be around anybody else. You don't want to contract COVID-19, okay? And so it makes a lot of sense for the government to find these key industries and make sure that they are still viable. So when the economy does open up, people can actually do things like maybe travel to a client in the Midwest or fly to New York and take care of, some of your clients that you haven't seen for 3 months. I mean, if the airline industry completely fails, then what are you going to do? Go back to trains, get on a Greyhound bus? I mean, that's not realistic. I mean, nobody wants to get on a Greyhound bus. And so the industry has to be propped up until they have customers. So I think it's, again, as somebody who's generally been a very fiscally conservative economist, right? It is very hard to say, yeah, the government should continue just these huge, massive payments, except for the alternative is these industries completely fail, and then it takes years to rebuild these in any kind of a structure that satisfies the needs of customers right out of the gates, or even if it's leaking out of the gates. So you need to prop these industries up, and without them, we can't do the business of America. And so I think it has to be done. It really does. And so, I applaud the government for actually taking big steps. I know that they tried to write the rules such that they weren't going to make, huge payments to and do stock buybacks and stuff like that. Like, I think that's appropriate too. I mean, this money is not to, pad the wallets of a few people. It's to keep the industry alive. It's to keep the airline alive. Because if it isn't, then you cannot have a recovery. Same thing with the auto industry, and same thing with oil and gas. Like, we're in trouble there too.
Tom, how do you feel this is going to impact family vacationing, and will VRBO and Airbnb survive as well as the major global hotel names, Hyatt, Hilton, Marriott?
Yeah, well, the hotels are in big trouble. I know that they were part of the package as well. I know people from Marriott and Hyatt Intercontinental Hotel Group right here in Georgia. They have probably either interacted with the White House directly or indirectly, have representatives from the industry that's interacted with the White House. I know that Trump mentioned talking to CEOs of a number of those companies. Yeah, it's clearly if you're going to have business travel, you need to have some place that people are going to stay, and they typically stay at all the hotels, the Hyatts, the Marriotts, the ICG, whatever, what have you. So that said, that industry is going to need to be propped up as well. And I know that they were part of the fiscal stimulus package, and because it is hugely important that people have places to stay when this economy gets back and rolling. And so I don't know, what was the question exactly? I want to make sure that I'm answering what people are asking.
In addition to business travel, how do you think this is going to impact personal family vacationing and VRBO, Airbnb?
Yeah. Well, I know that VRBO and Airbnb, they're not getting any customers right now. It's the transaction costs of exiting and entering that market are so small anyway, so that if it's possible that VRBO goes out of business and then another company will step in. And so, even before VRBO, you had companies that were, let's say, renting out cabins in the North Georgia mountains. Essentially, VRBO is just that model exploded. So, those kind of markets can kind of come in and come out fairly fluidly. So yeah, VRBO might very well go out of business, and then it will be replaced by some other company that will ramp up pretty quickly. I would anticipate that people are really done with the staycation. Like, I'm done with the staycation. Nobody wants to stay home this summer. Everybody wants to go somewhere, New Orleans or New York or who knows, right? Cancun, whatever. I fully anticipate that when this is done and people feel safe, that they're going to let loose a little bit. So everybody's going to meet in Vegas or something. So I think that there's going to be some vacationing. People are going to want to get out. I think that how they vacation and how often they vacation might very well change based on if they feel confident and secure that they're not going to get COVID, whatever version it's going to be, right? If this thing mutates and it comes back again next year, COVID-20 or what have you. So if people have some certainty that they're not going to be infected, then they might very well go out and go crazy. I think that that's what people are anticipating about the whole economy, is that everybody's going to go out and go crazy. I think people are going to be much more reserved. And so I would fully anticipate that the entertainment industry, hospitality, is going to suffer for a while. So I think it's going to be very, very drawn out before people are vacationing the way that they were before.
Tom, can you comment on the recent World Monetary Fund's GDP projections chart for 2020 and 2021?
I don't have that chart in front of me, and it would take me probably a couple minutes to pull it up. So I don't want to speak about something that I don't have in front of me, and I apologize. But if whoever asked that question, if you would please send me an email, tom.smith@emory.edu. I'll make sure that I look this up and I answer the question, and we get this on the Facebook. I've been working on trying to get questions answered, and I'm dedicating a lot of today in order to do that. And so if you will please do that, and or email the registration here, Ms. Keisha, some other people, I will look this chart up, and I will answer that question. But I don't want to speak without looking at the numbers so that we know what we're both talking about. Okay. So I'm sorry about that.
Thanks, Tom. Can we talk about education for a minute?
Sure.
Do you think a model of year-round schools may be put in place as remote learning here to stay? And how does that impact pay for teachers?
So I do not think that removing ourselves from brick and mortar schools is a good idea. Okay. One of the reasons I think that it's not a good idea is because so homeschooling for a lot of people is they're realizing that there is a huge amount of human capital that's involved in schooling your kids. So making sure that they're focused, getting them resources. So people who are trying to work at home and homeschool their kids right now are finding it incredibly difficult to do this. So it's not a reality that we can have 100% homeschooled going forward and a workforce. It's just, those are two things that are incapable of being together. Do I think that year-round schooling is a potential? In some states and some school districts, year-round schooling makes a lot of sense for how it is that they allocate their time, how students allocate their time. People who've done year-round schooling, my older daughter did year-round schooling at one point, and it worked well for her. She she had like a month off of vacation here, and then she would go back, and then she'd have 3 weeks off there, and she would go back. And I mean, she did very, very well in that system, and that system worked great. But it's not for everybody. I do think that people will have a different appreciation for what it means to actually educate kids, because they'll say, oh my gosh, like this was so difficult for me to do that. Great. But I don't think that teachers are going to get a huge increase in pay as a result of that. People might just be a little bit more forgiving as to the fact that teachers need, a couple months off in the middle of the summer to like reconnect and recharge. And so, hopefully people just have a better appreciation for how hard it is to educate kids and how much energy that takes. And I think people do. So it's a great question.
Tom, what is the likelihood of more manufacturing occurring domestically in the long run as a result of this crisis and the desire of businesses to lower the exposure to these types of risks in the future?
So I did see that. So the manufacturing numbers are way, way down. I just saw a report yesterday about this. We have been moving manufacturing away from the United States. We have a comparative disadvantage in a lot of manufacturing. We do have a comparative advantage in some manufacturing, and clearly some manufacturing still takes place here, okay? But we do have some comparative disadvantages, and so sending manufacturing to China, Mexico, Taiwan, Philippines, I mean, it's something we've been doing for a long time. Companies that continue to have a comparative advantage are going to stay in business and just literally have no customers, and so it doesn't make sense for them to stay in operations. I don't think that the COVID crisis is going to change whether or not somebody has a comparative advantage and whether or not they can actually exist in this market. I think it will change, like looking at long run prospects, trying to identify what your consumer base is and how long the consumer base is viable. So like, okay, is this a product that's going to last for a long time? But I mean, I've got some colleagues and friends whose manufacturing business is going gangbusters right now. Like they can't make enough stuff because people want that particular thing. And so I think it's unfair to put all manufacturing in one particular bucket. I think different companies are going to have to reevaluate what their customers look like. But coming out of the COVID, it's not going to change, so to say, the relative comparative advantage that you have over some other country.
All right, everyone. We are coming to the end of part 3 of our Economy and Me webinar series on behalf of Emory Executive Education and Tom Smith. We want to thank you all so much for joining us this morning, and we hope you all will join us for part 4 next Thursday at 9 a.m. with Tom. A copy of this recording is going to become available on the Emory Executive Education LinkedIn page, and momentarily you will notice a survey pop up on your screen. We do ask that you all just take about 1 to 2 minutes to provide your feedback on today's webinar. So Tom, I'm going to kick it back over to you to close us out.
Okay. All right. So I know that there's a lot of questions, and I know that we've been trying to get all these questions answered. And we're doing the best that we can. I mean, everything is very, very overwhelming at this point. I know that a lot of what I'm saying are different aspects of what I've said in the past, but the economy is moving in such a fluid way, and it has been changing so much that I encourage you to, if not tune in here next week or not tune in week after, what have you, to just continue to read and be informed and read as many different, let's say, perspectives as you can, okay? And also don't take everything that you're hearing sort of at its face value. And so I was just looking at a chat from somebody who says, look, our hospital's not firing people, our hospital is redeploying. Yeah, I mean, my buddy is a nurse practitioner up in Chicago, and he says, look, his part of his practice is winding down. He works in internal medicine, but he says, but he used to work in the ICU. He's been asked if he would be willing to go back to the ICU if push came to shove. He worked in the ER for years as a triage nurse, and they've said, look, I know that you're a nurse practitioner, but would you be willing to work as a triage nurse again, or would you, be willing to take on some of those responsibilities? He said, he's a hospitalist, but he's willing to help out the hospital in the ways that they need. But there are also people in the hospital that they haven't figured out how to redeploy them or how to, let's say, reinitiate them into the areas that are of high need. Like, not every skill is immediately transferable. So I would say that this is just one example, right? And so there are other examples where you say, well, I heard this is what's going on over here. Okay, well, make sure that you get as many perspectives as you can, because the truth is that what might be true for one company might not exactly be true for everything else, or it might not fully explain the plethora of different ways that COVID is impacting all the different players in this economy. And so I would say just stay informed and be aware that what's happening with one organization might not be exactly what's happening with the other organization. So I appreciate that comment was brought up. So that's it. Just stay safe and stay informed. And thank you for participating.